Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Burman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. President Trump, Xi Jinping. China today saying the U.S. is being, as they see it, unreasonable. How the White House is responding this evening. Plus, the second story tonight, the Second Amendment. Why the Supreme Court both passed on a case involving AR-15s while also basically saying there is more to come. Also tonight, you could call it mixed signals. Democrats calling themselves roadkill and slow. But why did a Republican senator cite the tooth fairy when facing some major criticism of her own? But first tonight, here from the Hill, terror in Colorado. The FBI saying tonight they believe a lone suspect is behind the attack in Boulder, targeting members of the Jewish community.
No one should ever be subjected to violence of any kind. But our laws recognize that such violence is particularly pernicious when someone is targeted because of their race, their religion, or their national origin.
We'll be joined by the Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council in just a moment, but we begin tonight in Boulder, Colorado with our Nancy Liu, who has the very latest there. Nancy?
Blake, 45-year-old Mohammed Soliman is being held here at the Boulder County Jail. He's already had his first court appearance, and during which we saw extra law enforcement officers on top of the building. Now, in court, Soliman acknowledged his rights. He's ordered back on June 5th to face dozens of state charges and a very serious federal charge, commission of a hate crime. Now, according to the criminal complaint, there is a lot of physical evidence and clear indication he brought enough incendiary devices to hurt or kill as many people as possible. Take a listen.
And when he was interviewed about the attack, he said he wanted them all to die. He had no regrets, and he would go back and do it again. He said that he had previously tried to purchase a firearm, but resorted to the Molotov cocktails when he could not purchase a gun because he was not a legal citizen.
According to law enforcement, Soliman researched YouTube to figure out how to make Molotov cocktails. And he allegedly crafted a backpack weed sprayer into a makeshift flamethrower by filling it with gas. Yesterday's fiery attack injured 8 people, including a Holocaust survivor in her 80s. 2 victims remain hospitalized. Now, federal officials confirmed to NewsNation that Soliman was in the U.S. illegally, overstaying a tourist visa after arriving in Los Angeles back in 2022. Now, it's not clear when he moved here to Colorado, but the investigation has revealed he's been living in Colorado Springs with a wife and 5 kids, Blake.
Our Nancy Liu with the very latest tonight in Boulder, Colorado. Nancy, thank you. President Trump now reacting to the incident, writing, quote, "The horrific attack in Boulder, Colorado will not be tolerated in the United States of America." He came in through Biden's ridiculous open border policy, the president says, which has hurt our country so badly, end quote. The White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, mentioning deportations as well today.
And we know that this individual, this terrorist, was allowed into this country by the previous administration, was foolishly given a tourism visa, and then was illegally allowed to stay. These individuals are going to be deported, and we're not going to tolerate such violence in our country.
Joining us live now here on the Hill from the North Lawn, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He is the Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Dr. Gorka, thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. We saw and continue to cover what happened in Boulder, Colorado. Just a couple weeks ago, there was 2 Jews who were killed at a museum here in Washington, D.C. as well. Both of these incidents just in a matter of days or a week and a half or so. What is the White House doing, sir, to try to take on these incidents and to make sure that this stops and doesn't happen again?
Well, Blake, we're reversing everything the Biden-Harris administration did for the last 4 years that has left us open to these heinous attacks. So basically, anybody could come into this country, tens of millions of illegals with zero vetting. They just had to download the CBP1 app paid for by you and me as taxpayers and say that they're here as asylum seekers or overstay their visas, as this individual did. And we're not going to allow that to happen. We've deported more than 200,000 illegals thanks to the incredible work of Governor Noem, now as DHS Secretary, Tom Homan and Stephen Miller as Homeland Security Advisor. And we're identifying the #1 threats and getting rid of them. We are undoing the normalization of Jew hatred, because this is what it is. When you have an administration like the Biden administration that normalizes anti-Semitism, whether on the campuses of Ivy League colleges like Harvard, or whether in Congress with the Squad and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, this is what you get at the end of the day. We are reversing all of those policies.
I heard you just mention deportations, but I'm looking at anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S., Dr. Gorka, over the last decade, and there was a severe spike starting in 2023, continuing in 2024 as well, basically a 900% increase over the last decade or so. Why is this happening? And now that it is the Trump administration that is in charge, sir, and will be in charge for the next 44 months, what is your administration going to do about this?
Why is it happening? Well, very simply, because of the left that has normalized Jew hatred. I refuse to even use the word anti-Semitism, because organizations and movements like the BDS, the Boycott, Divest and Sanction movement, are just new cloaked versions of the rank anti-Semitism and Jew hatred of the past. When you have thousands of people on the streets of New York, on the campuses of Harvard and Columbia, chanting from the river to the sea, those aren't MAGA voters. Those aren't the 77 million who put my former boss back in the White House as the commander-in-chief again. That is the left. And we know what the river to the sea means. That is a genocidal chant. Even if the former President Gay of Harvard, doesn't know what it means, we do. So whether it's making sure that there are no federal funds that go to organizations that are propagating the Jew hatred on their campuses, or whether it is identifying those who are aiding and abetting terrorist organizations in this country and removing them or arresting them. We are taking, absolutely. It's not just
because I look at the executive order.
Incubator.
Yeah, I look at the executive order, sir, that the president signed basically 10 days into office, and I've seen a governor's mansion in the state of Pennsylvania be targeted. I've now seen Jews at a museum murdered. I've seen Jews just on a street in the city of Denver, in the middle of the country, targeted. So is it time for the administration to yes, obviously the incidents on college campuses, you are taking that head on, but I guess what the point that I'm getting to is, do you need to look broader here?
Oh, we are. Absolutely, we are. But we're just pointing out the normalization of this hatred begins at these institutions. When you've got an 18-year-old and 19-year-old who's being told that you can wipe people out and use genocidal chants simply because of what religion they belong to. But yes, we are. Look, there's a reason that we have people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino running the FBI, people like Pam Bondi at the Department of Justice, because they understand that it's not just the words and the rhetoric, it is actually the aiding and abetting of FTOs and foreign terrorist organizations. That is a crime, and you will pay the severest penalty if you support those organizations.
You just mentioned Kash Patel, and I think of a statement that his predecessor, Christopher Wray, the former director of the FBI, said in April of last year. The attack at the museum here in Washington, lone wolf. Today, authorities out there in Denver said they believed it was a lone wolf. Here was Christopher Wray last year, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
Our most immediate concern has been that individuals or small groups will draw some kind of twisted inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks here at home.
That was him a year ago. It's what happened in May, and it's what happened in June. From your perch, do you believe that? Do you share the same sentiment as former Director Wray?
Well, he was lying. I mean,
So?
that is the disgraced director of the FBI who, instead of actually hunting down individuals like today's perpetrator, who was here, by the way, for 3 years under the Biden administration illegally.
Is it your worry, though, going forward?
Hang on. Let me finish my sentence. He proudly declared the biggest investigative operation of the FBI's history was to go after the quote-unquote domestic terrorists of January the 6th, including 72-year-old grandmothers who took selfies inside Congress. That man is a disgrace to the badge he once wore, because instead of going after jihadis like the Boulder, Colorado perpetrator, he did what? He had the FBI illegally surveilling Catholics in Richmond, Virginia, because they went to Latin Mass. Christopher Wray is a disgrace, and good riddance to him. We, under Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, are actually going after the jihadis.
What he said there, though, about lone wolves, what I'm getting at, Dr. Gorka, do you share that same view from your perch within the NSC right now?
Yeah, I never subscribe to the lone wolf theory, because sooner or later you find a connection to the broader organization or the ideology of jihad, except for one case, the pathetic Jihadi Jane case you may remember from Pennsylvania. There is never, ever a successful attack that has zero connection to the broader global jihadi movement, and where the individual is either getting blessed by a radical imam or is ingesting the radical ideology of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Lone actors, sooner or later, connect to the broader global jihadi movement, which is what it is and what we're calling it. It is global jihad, whether of the Sunni or Shia variety, and we are taking it deadly seriously in this administration.
We'll leave it there. Dr. Sebastian Gorka with the NSC. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
Good. Thank you, Blake.
You got it. Joining me now, the Republican congressman from the state of Colorado, Gabe Evans. He is a member of the Homeland Security Committee. Congressman Evans also represents Colorado's 8th district, just outside of Boulder. Congressman, thanks for jumping on with us tonight. You're there in your hometown. As you talk to your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, your community, how's everyone responding tonight?
Well, first and foremost, everybody is, of course, horrified by the violence that has occurred, the anti-Semitism, particularly when you have a Holocaust survivor who's come to the United States, who should be safe here from that sort of violence and hate, and who ends up being a victim of this crime. But as you can see behind me, you know, I spent 22 years in the military and law enforcement. I'm a combat vet from the global war on terror. I was a police officer for 10 years. And so this is incredibly frustrating to me, because as you just heard your former guest talking about, there's going to be clues and indicators. There's going to be connections that state, local, and federal law enforcement can identify to try to prevent things like this from happening.
One of the questions, Congressman, and you're leading me right into it, was how did law enforcement not know? Right? And what clues did they or didn't they have? Here was law enforcement asked today, essentially, was this guy on your radar at all? I want to play their answer, get your reaction on the other side.
He was not on our radar in Boulder. We had no prior contacts with him here. I can't speak to his criminal history. I'm not sure if the special agent in charge has anything to add, but this was not someone that we were aware of prior.
How?
Yeah, and here's why I'm frustrated. Because one of the major points of the 9/11 Commission, which says, how do we prevent major terrorist attacks from happening in the United States again, says that federal, state, and local law enforcement have to be able to work together and share information. Unfortunately, Colorado is a sanctuary state where our governor just within the last month signed into a law another bill that fines state and local law enforcement $50,000 if they share information with Immigration and Customs. We know this guy overstayed 2 visas. We know this guy is illegally present in the United States, and that makes him off limits for any information sharing between state and local law enforcement with their federal authorities.
Do you think the feds need to do more, though? I was sort of getting at that with the White House, which is there's a problem right now. What can they do about it? What can be done from the federal level?
Yeah, we've had a problem for the last 4.5 years, ever since the previous administration threw open the borders and allowed people to just flood into the country. We saw the numbers from ICE last summer, 667,000 individuals illegally present in the United States with criminal histories. hundreds of terrorist either gotaways or people on the terrorist watch list that have been released into the community. So we're cleaning up a problem right now that's been 4 years in the making. And unfortunately, that's not something that gets solved in a day. And it's definitely not something that gets solved when you can't have federal, state, and local law enforcement working together because they're banned in sanctuary states like Colorado.
Gabe Evans is the congressman from down the road in Aurora, down the road from Boulder, there with us tonight here on the Hill. Sir, we wish you the best for your community there in the upcoming days, weeks, and months. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Still to come tonight here on the Hill. The right to bear arms. Did you hear what the Supreme Court did today? Basically said, you know what, we're not going to touch this thing now, but see you soon. Why that was their message today. Plus, the fight between the president and China. Is it really as bad as it appears? 2 months since Liberation Day, quote unquote, what has happened? I'm going to show you the numbers. And Tim Walz, he almost became the next vice president. Did he really just call his own party roadkill? Welcome to Washington. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Burman. The Hill is back in 4 minutes. See you then. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. The Supreme Court deciding it will not review bans on assault-style weapons and high-capacity firearm magazines, at least for this moment. Now, guns and gun ownership, we know this. People have strong opinions on either side of the conversation. But we're diving into this tonight because the High Court gave a pretty big hint today that it could eventually weigh in on the issue of AR-15s. Now, AR-15s are often called America's rifle. It was designed by Armalite in the late 1950s, created as a military rifle that would allow soldiers to hold more ammo, deliver greater firepower with less recoil. The first time an AR-15 was used, Vietnam, 1963. Right now, somewhere in the area of about 1 in 20 Americans own an AR-15. The gun industry estimates there's about 20 million AR-15s in circulation. The most common reasons people use one: self-defense and protection, recreation and target shooting, hunting and sport shooting as well. But we've also seen them used in some of the country's biggest tragedies. For example, the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut in 2012, killing 26. The 2017 music festival shooting on the Las Vegas Strip, killing 60 people. And the shooting at Robb Elementary School recently in Uvalde, Texas in 2022, killing 21 people. Now today, while the court declined to take up a case involving Maryland's AR-15 ban, the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh sent a strong signal that the court could eventually decide the constitutionality of AR-15s, writing, quote, "In my view, this court should and presumably will address the issue soon in the next term or two." With me now, breaking this down, NewsNation legal contributor Jesse Weber with us once again here on the Hill. Hello, sir.
Thanks so much for having me. Big topic tonight.
Of course, yeah, huge topic. And look, here's why I wanted to talk to you. Let's break this up a couple different ways. They said we're not touching this issue today. Why?
So if you listen to Kavanaugh, well, first of all, from a practical point of view, they needed 4 justices to vote to hear the case. They couldn't get it. So Alito wanted to hear it, Gorsuch, Thomas. But Kavanaugh was interesting. He basically said this is an issue that's still being considered by lower courts. The First Circuit's hearing it. The other courts are hearing it. I want more guidance. I want to know how they're ruling on it before we issue a decision. Blake, let me tell you, not only will they hear it, they have to hear it. There is so much confusion across courts about when is a gun regulation unconstitutional. Yes, the Supreme Court years ago said it has to be rooted in history and tradition. Nobody really knows what that means. And even recently, Roberts had to come out and clarify it. So they definitely need to hear this case.
How normal or not is the comma but, which in this case was we're not touching this now, comma but, it's coming down the road?
So the Supreme Court has historically has pushed the can down the road. I don't feel that. They've decided issues that they need to decide. Sometimes a case comes up to them and you say, oh my gosh, they're now going to set the law of the land. Sometimes they don't. They decided on a narrow issue. Here's one perspective where they say, listen, we're going to hear it. I want to hear what the other courts have to say. We'll hear it in the next term or two, probably. And by the way, Kavanaugh not only said that, he also made the argument that he thinks the challengers to the ban are going to win. That if you look at AR-15s are owned by Americans all across the country, millions of Americans, a lot of states allow them. So he basically said the ban is, there's a chance it's going to be ruled unconstitutional.
We got to leave it there. Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. We'll see you in the next term or two. Or in the next day or two is probably more likely. All right, Jesse, thank you. Appreciate it, bud. Still much more ahead tonight here on The Hill. Did you know it's been 60 days since quote-unquote Liberation Day? Hello on June 2nd. Remember this scene on April 2nd? So what exactly has happened? Remember all of those worries and fears? On the other side. Just about 6:30 here on the East Coast. It's been 2 months, don't you know, since President Trump announced his quote-unquote Liberation Day tariffs. Tariffs that day set off a trade fight between the U.S. and China and certain parts of the world. At least with China, it hasn't let up, and it seemed to escalate over the weekend. President Trump accusing China of violating the 90-day truce that was reached in Switzerland last month. China pushed back, saying that the U.S. undermined discussions by, quote, issuing export control guidelines for AI chips, stopping the sale of chip design and software to China, and announcing the revocation of Chinese student visas. Back and forth we go. Get used to it. But what is the latest? Our Robert Sherman live at the White House. Robert?
Yeah, Blake, that back and forth you mentioned between China and the U.S. has been ongoing pretty much ever since the president returned to office in January. But today, the White House says we can expect Presidents Trump and President Xi Jinping to speak one-on-one, likely this week. Take a listen.
I can confirm that the two leaders will likely talk this week. And as always, when there are foreign leader calls, we will provide a readout of those calls.
Conversation set to happen as both the U.S. and China have accused one another of violating agreements on trade. As tariff negotiations have remained tense since the beginning. The U.S. contending China is holding back products for the industrial supply chain, whereas China says America is, quote, provoking economic and trade frictions. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has described negotiations between these two nations as hitting a stall, adding he believes it will take the two heads of state to speak themselves in order to get a deal done. Blake?
Robert Sherman live at the White House. Robert, thank you. So here's what I wanted to do, because it's June 2nd, Liberation Day, quote unquote, April 2nd, right? Remember all the concerns and the questions and what comes next. Well, now we have 60 days of sort of knowledge, of data, of what exactly has happened. So let me walk you through some of it. Just 1 week after announcing the tariffs, the president ended up rolling many of them back, the reciprocal tariffs, giving time to negotiate trade deals. But then he ramped up the pressure on China, raising the effective tariff rate from the mid-50s to 145%. But just recently, of course, both sides came to that temporary truce, the president reducing the rate on China to 30%. China, by the way, has dropped it to 10%. So that's some of the timeline. Now, the markets. This is what's happened. Look at this. After dropping sharply following April 2nd, stocks have recovered their losses. This is the 60-day snapshot. The Dow basically flat, the S&P 500 up 4.5%, and look at the NASDAQ absolutely ripping, up 9%. Again, this since April 2nd. Now, the main criticism of the tariffs have been that they will spike prices, but we haven't seen that happen, at least not yet. In April, inflation cooled to the lowest level in 4 years. But there's been some mixed reaction from the retailers. You know that headline from Walmart, right? Walmart raising prices as tariffs drive up costs. That got so much play, and rightfully so. It's one of the biggest companies in this country, right? But how about another one of the big players? Home Depot says it doesn't expect to boost prices because of the tariffs. So where do we go from here? Chris Liza is a NewsNation contributor. And former Trump budget associate Jessica Anderson with me as well. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
So let's
Is that
start.
a thing?
It's a thing.
I guess it is now.
It is now. So Friday, I'm sitting here and I'm like, markets close. Whoa, Trump just jacked up prices, tariffs on steel.
Yeah.
And then what happens over the weekend? Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, says tariffs aren't going away. Trump makes some posts. China fires back. And you know what the markets did? They didn't care one bit. They were in the green today, Chris. And that's where we are in part 60 days in.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, like the lesson the markets have learned, I think, 60 days in is don't take anything he says on tariffs, at least, all that seriously, right? Because, look, as you point out, Blake, the reciprocal tariffs went into place. The market went, But a week later, he suspended the vast majority of them. And what have we seen since then? Well, we're going to EU 50% on June 1st. Well, we're going to suspend it to July 1st. I think they basically are saying, like, Trump is going to Trump on tariffs like he does with everything else. And we are not. I would guess you don't see the peaks and valleys, the big roller coaster going forward. I think it'll return to kind of the more traditional way that we've seen it, because I think it's baked in the cake now for a lot of these guys.
So did Trump see what happened, Jessica? Because he raised the tariffs, then he's brought them down, basically kept them at this level. He's said, you know, they've got to deal with the UK, or at least a framework. More are out there. Taking on China, that's as bipartisan as anything that you'll find in Washington. That's a winner. And keep your eye on the bond markets, right? Because the second the bond markets got, I think he called it yippy, right? Or had the yips a little bit.
That's
golf term. That's when he made his move on April 9th. And I guess the point is, you kind of have that data and that material out there to look back 60 days in and say, okay, are these the goalposts?
Yeah. So the whole point of all of this is to negotiate with China. Let's remember, he campaigned on making things right with China. He campaigned on America not being taken advantage of. And if you look back in even 2024, the United States-China trade relationship was the worst of any trading party. $300 billion. Almost $300 billion. That's so much money of a trade deficit between our largest trading companies. So this whole thing, the last 60, 90, even 100 days has been about making it right with China, forcing them to the table and negotiating.
So then here was Caroline Levitt earlier today, since you talk about China. Watch.
Well, the European Union came to the table thanks to President Trump's threat of tariffs, and now we are seeing that they are negotiating in good faith with our delegation. So we remain hopeful and optimistic that a deal can be struck.
So is it about China, or is it about the EU and this country and this country and that country?
The eye on the prize is China. If he can get China right, and if he can get the trade deal at least somewhat even between our two countries, then everything else is going to follow suit. This whole thing is about China. And I actually think that's why the other things have been dripping into the news the last 10 days. You have the issues in Harvard. You have the fentanyl conversations that are happening on Capitol Hill just behind us this last week. All of these other things are about unfair deals with China. Trade is number one, and then all these other ways that we have been taken advantage of.
I keep reminding people, though, from the first tariffs in 2018 on China to the phase one deal at the back end of 2019, that was 20 months. And here we are just a few months in, or 2 months in, I should say. This is going to be a long road,
and
is it not?
I think that's what's hard is I think we live culturally. Trump has some role in this, but he didn't create this. We live in a instant gratification world, right? And the reality, Jessica can speak to this way smarter than I can. The reality of these things is trade deals are not just like,
they're not
oh,
overnight.
well, we shook hands.
They're not overnight.
It's extremely complicated. And I think he sets this thing where it's like, even in Ukraine and Russia, well, I don't know if they want a deal. It's like, well, we're talking about a ceasefire with land acquisition. Like, it's not, none of these things are as easy, but we live in a world where it's like, why don't I have my pizza? I ordered it 32 seconds ago. I think it's hard with that.
When do you, so if there is a deal with China, let me leave you with this. If there is a deal with China on a, let's just call it a phase one or something like it, and I use that term because that's what happened last time, how long does it take to get there?
Oh, I think we're weeks, if not a few months away. This is not going to be an overnight thing.
A few months would be quick, though.
And I think we should be pleased with that.
Okay.
Look, and I think the American people actually, I mean, I agree, we like things quickly, but on this, the more I talk to Americans out in America, they're willing to wait because they want to get this right.
Okay.
They want to get it right.
Hang around, other side of the break. Appreciate you both. Still to come tonight here on The Hill. A Republican senator in the headlines after some comments that really got some headlines.
So people are not, well, we all are going to die.
So she basically said, you know what, we're all going to die. And then her apology came by citing the tooth fairy. That's just one side of the aisle. The Minnesota governor on the other, the former Democratic vice presidential nominee, said his party needs to be meaner. Huh? Full panel, other side.
Thank you for joining me here on NewsNation.
No matter where you are, America's fastest growing, down the middle, unbiased, breaking news coverage is always at your fingertips. Download the NewsNation app or go to newsnationnow.com to learn how.
All right, welcome back here to The Hill on News Nation. Former President Abraham Lincoln famously said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." According to a new poll, when it comes to party leadership, only 16% see the Democratic Party as one with strong leaders. That compares to 40% who say that description applies to Republicans. So are the Democrats a party that's lost in the wilderness? Listen to how two Democrats, the former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, the current Maryland governor Wes Moore, describe the state of their party.
They don't want to see us standing like a deer in the goddamn headlights. And there's a good reason for that. Nobody votes for roadkill. Nobody votes for roadkill.
Gone are the days when the Democrats are the party of no and slow. We must be the party of yes and now.
Now, while the Democratic Party tries to find a path forward, Republicans are still having a bit of a conversation of their own on how to go about the big, beautiful bill. During a town hall on Friday in which the Iowa Senator Joni Ernst dismissed an attendee who yelled out their concern about potential cuts to Medicaid in the bill. Quote, she said, "People are going to die." And this was the senator's response.
So people are not, well, we all are going to die.
And over the weekend, the senator responded with this.
I made an incorrect assumption that everyone in the auditorium understood that, yes, we are all going to perish from this earth. So I apologize. And I'm really, really glad that I did not have to bring up the subject of the tooth fairy as well.
Full panel here with me now. Chris Cillizza is a News Nation contributor. T.W. Riggi, former communications aide to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Jessica Anderson, former budget official in the first Trump administration. And Kurt Bardella, News Nation contributor, Democratic strategist. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here. So here's the way I kind of lay this one out. Democrats have a bit of a macro problem, right? Who are we? Where do we go? What do we stand for? Republicans have sort of questions on the micro side of things, which is how do we talk about this bill? Let's start with your side of the aisle, though, Kurt. What'd you make of those comments from Wes Moore, Tim Walz over the weekend as well?
I mean, I get what they're trying to do. I just don't think it's going to work. Here's the thing. The Tim Walz Democrats should be meaner or whatever. Like, right. No, they don't, because they're never going to do it as well as Republicans. I am a former Republican. Let me tell you, we knew and know how.
You take issue to that?
I mean it as a compliment. That's
okay.
Not even an insult. It's like we're just better at the brawl, at the street fight, at the hand-to-hand combat element of politics and campaigns. Do not fight the terrain on their strong ground. You will never win a battle doing that. They need to stop talking about Republicans and Trump so damn much, honestly, and start talking about who they are, what we stand for, what our vision for the American public is, because so many people right now, when you ask, what does the Democratic Party stand for, they have no freaking clue.
When you said that, Jessica turned to me and gave me a wink. So
well,
what was that?
What I just heard was don't argue with Republicans about policy, about who's making life better for all Americans. Beat them in the tactics. I mean, that is not what the American people want to hear right now. This is why, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is spending, what, $20 million plus on how to talk to men? A group of people that they have villainized and called toxic masculine, you know, show horses the last decade, and now all of a sudden they're going to reach them and trust them.
I can save you $20 million.
Come on.
All they got to do
Kurt and I could do it for $5.
I was going to say,
right? We haven't discussed it beforehand.
For $5 million, just buy a ticket to a country music concert or a WWE event. They're study done.
I also think, like, all of this stuff with the Democratic Party, like, look, the reason that people like Trump, and I think the Democratic base struggles to understand this, is people believe, whether you think he is or not, people think he's authentic. They think he's comfortable in his own skin. They think because he says stuff that they think but won't say, they think he's like a real human. They don't love everything he says or does. And the thing about it is, it's not like be meaner, be nicer, be more liberal, be more conservative. You have to find people who can, and I don't think this is Tim Walz, sorry, Tim Walz, but who can authentically, not through a $20 million study, but just be able to talk to people. And amazingly, I will say this, having covered politics for a long time, you would think ability to talk to regular people would be like in the... It is remarkably hard to find people who can talk to regular people.
I'm getting to your side in a second here, but I'll...
If you boil it down, it's be normal. Yeah. They have been this whole party's been co-opted by this far-left, youthful group that doesn't speak for the regular people, and all these other politicians are caught in between. And to channel Rick Pitino, Bill Clinton ain't walking through that door, Democrats. Barack Obama ain't walking through that door. And even if they did, they couldn't win in the modern Democratic Party. Until they get to the core of that, they won't win.
And by the way, Blake, just very quickly, why did Tim Walz wind up as the VP? Because he had one good moment. He said, these guys are just weird, right? And then he just ran. That was actually, like, I think that resonated because it was like, people know what weird is. You know what I mean? Like, but I think he actually has the right message. I just think he's the wrong message.
So then if that's sort of like the macro issue for Democrats, where do they go from here? On the micro side for Republicans, I mean, my gosh, TW, when it's, we're all gonna die at some point, why write legislation? Because we're all gonna die. You're gonna die, I'm gonna die, we're all gonna die.
Look,
what are we doing here?
Look, if we're going to be the adults when it comes to debt and deficits, we need to own it and take advantage. Nobody can have a serious argument about getting out of our debt and deficit crisis without addressing entitlements. Chris Christie did it miraculously way back in 2010 in a blue state like New Jersey by calling it like it is. Look, there are 3 million people, according to the CBO's numbers, on the rolls of Medicare who are there either illegally or inappropriately. Start there. 3 million people isn't nothing. They're there. They're not supposed to be on the rolls. Be honest with the American people. They will accept it if you're honest.
So here was Joni Ernst today being asked about all this.
I'm very compassionate, and you need to listen to the entire conversation.
Do you have any regrets about that?
We want to protect the most vulnerable.
And the elevator closed.
They're going to be cutting the ads already on this stuff.
Yes, and she is up for re-election, and I'm sure that is top of her mind. Of was this conversation, this back and forth, for President Trump's ears, or was it for the voters in Iowa? And I think that's a question that only she can answer. But I don't think we actually have a problem defending the bill. I think the reality is I don't think so.
You told me you wanted to have the policy conversation with him. He didn't just wink at me, but he just made another facial expression.
And I don't think we have a problem defending the bill. I think Joni Ernst spoke out of turn. She apologized. She's moving on. Well, the bill passed the House. I mean, she did. She said she was sorry.
That wasn't a real apology.
She
invoked a tooth fairy.
It wasn't even I'm sorry for those who I've offended, which I've done. It was
all that was missing was I am not a witch. I mean,
it was not that. It was not that. It was not that. This is, okay, what are the facts of the bill? The big, beautiful bill, while it does not tackle and provide a balanced budget, it gives the framework to do that next. It does extend the tax cuts. It does go deep on dereg. It has all the populist things that President Trump wanted on no tax on tips or overtime. Now let's get it to the Senate. And senators have to come together, and that's where I think our problem is can they actually come together to pass this thing the way the House
did? You're seeing some of that play out.
I mean, I think the challenge for Republicans is you have a large swath of the Republican Party that's spent a lot of oxygen over years talking about we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to balance the budget. We need to address a deficit. It's irresponsible. It's a spend, 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 spend. You might like the things that this bill spends things on, sure, but it still undermines that fiscal responsibility argument. And I don't think Republicans have figured out how to actually talk about that and own that.
$1.5 trillion.
Yeah, it cuts spending.
But you know what, though? But TW is right. Like, look, this is not a Republican or a Democratic thing. Until we address entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a $1 trillion defense budget. Like, if you take those things off the table and say, well, we can't talk about those things, you're cutting at the very edges. And I know people don't like it, and I know it's not, quote-unquote, good politics, but we are going into a very bad place over time.
Well, I would just note, too, Social Security, we're talking about Medicaid, Social Security, and Medicare. The trust funds run dry in, what, like 8, 9, 10 years, something like that?
I mean, it should be a bipartisan thing. It's not, because the politics are bad for both sides.
Let's do the small thing first.
Note, if George W. Bush was successful in his second term and passed Social Security reform, we wouldn't be in this position.
Yeah,
got to leave it here. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill. By the way, tomorrow I'm going to chat with the Republican senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, about all of this. Have you heard what he's saying? He's no fan of what's going on his side of the aisle. That's tomorrow here on the Hill. Still to come, though. Before then, he's one of the country's best golfers. Delivered a powerful message without saying a word. My take on the other side of the break. And coming up on Elizabeth Vargas Reports, Elizabeth will speak live with the Senior Advisor of Customs and Border Protection about the attack in Boulder. That's at 7 o'clock right here on NewsNation. My take, other side. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. If you were the President of the United States, you could basically do whatever you want. What might you do? Well, over at the White House, they've got a little putting green over there, as you can see, and one of the top aides over there at the White House posted this video just a little while ago. Bryson DeChambeau, the two-time U.S. Open champion, hitting golf balls, hitting chips on the south lawn. You see the balls sort of flying in there? Just getting a little practice over at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for Bryson DeChambeau. How about that? All right, time for my take now, and how about this? Fits in perfectly, right? If you've watched this show long enough, first off, thank you. But you might have heard me drop a golf reference or two. Just showed you that video, right? Now, today is known as the longest day in golf. At 10 courses across the country right now, roughly 700 of the best amateur, college, professional players at all levels come together. They play 36 holes today, competing for the final slots to play in what's essentially the country's championship, the U.S. Open, set to take place later this month. And that includes Max Homa, as seen here on the Golf Channel. Would you look at that, carrying his own bag? Now, some might think that's completely unremarkable. But Homa, keep in mind, has made $28 million in his career as one of the top American golfers in recent years. He has a professional caddy, could always splurge a few $100 or so on a Monday for someone at the local club to carry for him. Heck, they'd probably do it for free, just for the experience. But nope, there's Homa, lugging his own bag on his shoulder, carrying the load all by himself. The video went viral, golfers exclaiming, "He is one of us." Now, I don't know why Homa chose to do this, but it's a great reminder of the grind, showing the type of work ethic that got him there in the first place. And it goes well beyond golf, well beyond his success and his many millions. A reminder that while teamwork often gets celebrated, even the best sometimes decide there are certain times where they just need to put it all on their own back. And that's my take tonight. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Blake Burman. See you tomorrow.